Hey everyone, you're tuned into InfoQuench with Jeff.
And Amy. Join us as we talk about anything.
And everything.
All the stuff that makes life interesting.
So let's get to it. Hey everybody, and welcome to InfoQuench. I'm your host, Jeff.
And I'm Amy.
And this podcast, we just watched a really incredible show on Netflix called The Social Dilemma.
Right. According to Netflix, this documentary drama hybrid explores the dangerous human impact of social networking, with tech experts sounding the alarm on their own creations.
It really is incredible. It's like a Frankenstein, like a technological Frankenstein that they've unleashed on the world. It's not just a particular part of the world, it's the entire world. And it has implications in all of our lives. And I swear to God, as soon as I finished watching it, I wanted to delete my Facebook. I think we should talk about that.
Yes, among other things. We have lots of things
Yeah.
to touch on with this.
pretty crazy.
I think it got us thinking about. I think most families have conversations around social media, and if you have children, and how to monitor that, and what's an appropriate level. And then I think even as adults, we wonder how much time we're spending on technology, and whether we're wasting our time, and how to, do something that's like, how to monitor that so that it's at a healthy level. So I think this documentary really good. We got Jeff and I talking, so we wanted to do a podcast episode, and we're going to be a little bit all over the map here.
We will be all over the map, as usual.
As usual.
But there are a lot of things to unpack in this documentary, and I highly recommend everyone watch it. Even if you are a diehard social media person, like many millions of people, trillions of people in the United States and Canada and all over the world, but you may not like end your social media journey, but at least it's good to be aware of what it is that these corporations are doing.
I think
that's
really well put, because I think you and I often have this discussion, and I'm often on the side of, this is a part of life. This is a part of our culture. Our son Huxley is going to grow up in this climate of intense social media. So rather than trying to cut him off from it, it's a matter of making sure that we introduce it in a healthy way and set parameters and controls, and make sure that he has an understanding of it. And I kind of think of it like sugar, right?
Yeah.
We don't really have, in our household anyway, we don't really have any forbidden foods. We don't want to create that cutoff of
right.
There's certain things that you just, I guess crack. If he brought crack into the house,
crack.
there would
We're
be cut off
crackless
there.
house.
Yeah, hard line on the crack.
Yeah.
But there are certain things that just exist in society, and we have to learn to coexist with them. And how do we consume those things, whether they're social media or sugar or whatever it may be? How do we do that in a healthy way? So it's interesting that Jeff put this documentary on, and our son Huxley was playing his Nintendo Switch.
Yeah, he was.
And he actually immediately He put it down and started watching the documentary with us. He was really intrigued. Now, just a little bit of a warning. I think it's definitely a good documentary to watch with your kids, but there are some parts that he ended up watching just the first half with us. And I think there's some dark parts and some images that are a bit violent near the end. So you may want to pre-watch it, depending on the age, of your children, to determine whether or not it's appropriate for them.
Yeah, one of the things that I found fascinating, and I don't think this is really giving anything away about the documentary in general, but a lot of these CEOs and these architects of the technological wizardry behind Google and Facebook, they won't let their parents, or their kids rather,
and maybe not their parents,
be on social media.
Right.
Period.
They talked about some rules, and we'll cover that too. There's some that, if they do have their kids are using social media, they do set up some rules and limitations. Yeah. So what's great about this documentary is it's a series of, there is a drama component where they do have some actors, I like that aspect. Living it out. And
it kind of takes the everyday family and how technology and social media affects them, and how it controls their lives, really.
Well, and I think that, they personify AI
Yeah.
with actors, and I think looking at that, artificial intelligence as these actual people making
Yeah.
decisions for you, probably makes the content a little bit more interesting. It could probably be dry content otherwise. So I think the format, even though at first I was kind of like, when I see a documentary, I like it to be strictly. I'm one of those people. It's like, is it a documentary? Is it drama? I want it to
Oh,
be
yeah.
pure. But I think the format they chose works. And
I thought it worked as well, yeah.
and they had the people around the table that they needed to have. They had the founder of virtual reality. They had
Yeah.
some of the the people who were early on involved in
Facebook and
Pinterest,
Instagram,
Twitter. All the heavy hitters
Yeah.
who and some of those who had actually helped design the AI around
Yeah.
what and so we're then looking at what the consequences of their own inventions are,
Right.
and trying to sound the alarm a bit on what what can happen. So,
And I do believe that there is an alarm to be sounded. There's a lot of manipulation going on. And, again, without giving too much away, because I don't want people to watch this documentary, but like the data mining that goes on for each individual, as far as like push notifications and like, oh, watch this video next and stuff like that. None of that is by accident. All of that is preconceived by huge corporations for us to take it in hook, line, sinker, and make these large corporations money, in which they have no responsibility for what it is that they do to people, how they influence people and stuff, It's
And I
really
think
fascinating.
I think one of the big takeaways from the documentary is the need for legislation, regulation around the industry, around social media.
That was definitely the takeaway point, wasn't it? That was like, everybody was like, okay, if people think that large corporations are going to be able to fix this when it does eventually run out of control, like when they're wrong, because they're not equipped to do that,
Well, earlier today, Hux and I were at a shoe store, and we were standing in line. And when we were standing in line, and of course with the pandemic going on, everybody's social distance, so we're standing on our social distancing dot to make sure we
Yeah.
were 6 feet away from the people ahead of us. And we were lined up with a little display of Silly Putty.
Yeah.
And that caught Hux's eye, and he asked what it was. And I said, I explained briefly what Silly Putty was, but then I got into a bit of a discussion about the fact that I said, isn't it interesting that they have this display of things that kids like in the middle of a shoe store? I mean, it was completely out of
Yeah.
place, but I said, Hux, did you notice where it's at? And he's like, well, yeah, we're, because we're standing in line, we're right beside it. And I said, well, that's not accidental. That's what they do. They plan, it's all part of advertising, marketing. It's all about positioning. And I think that in talking to him about this, I thought, I'm quite aware of all of these marketing strategies and and I won't be fooled by them. But then when I watched this documentary,
We're all fooled at times.
it's, I think most of us are, I think most all of us are aware of the data mining that goes on. But the idea of what happens that we're not even aware of, I think to me,
It's
that's
important to
frightening.
know. It's important to know, though, I feel, because if you don't know that this is happening to you, you can't stop it. And so, or like fight against it. I don't think you could ever be able to stop it. These companies are way too powerful for us to just basically stop.
But they
it.
did have some of the experts gave at the end. So if you are watching the documentary, make sure you watch the little
Yeah.
bits with the credits. It's just like, I always watch that when they have a movie and they have the bloopers at the end. That's always my favorite part.
Yeah.
So I tend to stick around for the credits. But this actually has some little more candid conversations with those who are interviewed throughout the documentary, giving tips. And one of the tips is, don't go for the clickbait. If
Yeah.
YouTube is recommending the next video, don't click that. Go to something else.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily just follow people on Twitter who you agree with. Follow some people who you disagree with so that you're exposed to
Right.
other content and other ideas
Yeah.
that may not fit into the algorithm of what your typical pattern may be.
One of my favorite pieces of advice at the end I guess we're kind of so there's kind of spoilers in this.
Well, there's
but that's
spoilers,
okay,
but you know what? There's so much content in this documentary that even though we're going to give you we're going to talk on a lot of specific points in this podcast.
Yeah.
It's still worth watching because a lot of it was probably way above our heads in terms of what the experts were diving into, and so what we pulled from it may be different than what you pull from it, and what you focus on. So I'm not worried too much around the spoilers. I think it's still, and it's only an hour and a half running time to watch the documentary, so you can get through it pretty quickly.
Yeah, it was. But the thing that I took away was, just delete it. And because there's a huge world out there that people aren't really paying attention to as much as they should. And sometimes people aren't really paying attention to their loved ones, people in their lives, because they're so immensely addicted to social media. Like there's that dopamine aspect of social media, right? Especially like something like likes on Facebook or in Instagram, like likes and stuff. It's just like people really get a charge, and they need to have that reassurance that they're living their lives properly. But the flip side of all of that is when they don't get it, what happens? It's loneliness, right? They get lonely. They don't feel like they're adequate.
There was an alarming statistic. The thing that probably was the most depressing I found, they talked about the fact that Gen Z, which they defined, and I know there's different definitions depending on where you look, but in this documentary, they define Gen Z as anybody being born in 1996 or beyond. And what they found, I guess, unique around that generation is they are the first generation to be exposed to social media as early as middle school.
Right.
And as a result, once social media and internet and just basically all that content became available very mainstream on mobile devices, and I think they quote around 2011 to 2013 timeframe when that really skyrocketed in terms of accessibility. They also saw an astronomical increase in the statistics for hospitalization related to self-harm, and also suicide rates among that same middle school population. And which suicide rates, they said, was virtually, non-existent or very, very low prior to that. And then all of a sudden it was 100 and something percent increase. And I think it was a 70% increase in self-harm. And they talk about the fact that it's all the idea of the comparisons, right? The like you said, trying to get the likes on Facebook and the need to use filters and there's a lot of online cyberbullying and all that piece.
There's a lot of pressure to live up to this and live up to that on social media, especially for the younger generations. But if you look at, there are people who make their entire lives out of manipulating people to buy things on social media, influencers and whatnot. They live their lives to do that. And I remember seeing a story or a documentary about an influencer who it really brought them down. They realized that their life was hollow and didn't have any substance. And I find social media can do that if you believe everything that you see and you're taken in by all the advertisers and stuff. It doesn't seem like a very positive, happy place to be, or you know what I mean?
Right, but there's the flip side to that, and I'll go back to the piece when you talked about, they said one of the solutions is to delete, and I'm not of that mindset because I feel that social media does also so much good.
Oh yeah, they spoke about that.
I think about the isolation that people went through during the current, or that people are continuing to go through during the pandemic, and people who've had to self-isolate, and how all of a sudden social media became a crucial way for us to stay connected.
But it's not the one and only way to stay connected during a pandemic. Like you could pick up the phone, or you know what I mean. You don't I just mean you could delete Facebook and still connect with people during a pandemic, I feel.
Oh, definitely.
But a lot easier.
You could even write them a letter and send it in the mail.
You could do that, yeah.
And wait for it to get there, and then assuming that the post office was running and
well, that's what we did before social media, and whatever. But
But the thing is that I think society has moved towards making use of social media as their main platform for
Yeah.
whether they're doing. I mean, you and I, when we had our wedding, a Facebook group was how we did our
invited
Facebook
people.
invites,
Yeah.
right? We did a few traditional invitations, I think, for grandparents and that sort of thing. But it was really all done through a Facebook group.
But Facebook really and social media only replace methods to communicate that are already still that are still there. You know what I mean?
They're there,
Facebook-
but if society as a whole is making use of a certain platform and you cut yourself off from that, then you
But
cut
because
yourself
so many
off
people
from
are
connection.
making connections and using social media, it makes it easier for them to manipulate us en masse. Do you know what I mean? So it's like a double-edged sword. I agree. Listen, I'm not disagreeing. I mean, I agree that there are definite positive aspects of Facebook. Okay, let's, for the sake of talking, I have a question for you. If you had to come up with the top 3 reasons to delete Facebook, what would they be for you? Like, what things do you
Well, I
find
want to talk
are
about
most
some of
harmful?
Well, I can give you some positive things.
Okay, what are some positive things?
Well, the recent GoFundMe campaign that you
Yeah.
organized,
Yeah.
having those types of charitable fundraisers, the reason they're so successful is through social media.
Absolutely.
Right?
There's no question.
Election
that's-
platforms, in terms of like the pandemic, we're not getting to meet our candidates. We proudly host our podcast out of St. John, New Brunswick in Canada, and we actually have a provincial election coming up on September 14th here, and it's unique because we're in a pandemic, so you don't get that door-to-door campaigning or debate platforms that you might have. So using social media and those types of things are the ways that you educate yourself on what the platforms are for the various parties, and that helps determine how you're going to vote.
Yeah.
Getting information around the pandemic, safety precautions, current cases within your region that you need to be aware of, whether contact tracing. All of those things are, made possible through, or not made possible, but definitely facilitated with social media.
I feel like all of those things that you mentioned are possible without social media, though, as well. Because we had elections before social media and the message got out, But you're right, the message gets out even on a more grander scale when it comes. That I think, is the problem with social media. Things, whether it's positive or negative information, gets disseminated in just unbelievable amounts of hits and likes and comments and stuff. You know what I mean?
I'll go back to answering your question. You said 3 reasons why I would delete social media.
Yeah. Why would you? Yeah.
Well,
Let's just for the sake of talking, is one of them because it's a time waster? Does it take a lot of time?
sure. I don't.
Of your day?
I'm sure as most people, I grossly underestimate the amount of time I spend on social media, but I don't feel I spend more time than the average bear on social media.
Yeah.
So for me, I tend to use it to promote our podcast.
Absolutely.
So
that's another positive.
That's probably one of the main ways.
We don't make money on our podcast either.
So we
But-
just do it as a hobby. So social media is just the way that we share, the actual podcast.
Yeah.
Still not really getting to the delete, but
That's
okay.
okay.
So maybe
That's
time,
okay.
maybe time waster.
Yeah.
Maybe that
I
one.
feel it. I feel it.
But I feel it's important to stay up to
Each
date
time.
because we have a child who's going to be growing up in this age. I want to be aware of what the different apps are, and so to me, being involved in social media gives me an awareness that can help me with figuring out what controls need to be in place.
Right.
Still not getting to the reasons to delete, I guess.
That's okay. I mean, I think another reason is that people were like, "Oh, I have too many photos on there that I want to keep." That's a huge one.
Well, yeah,
and
you're right.
videos and
Facebook is
stuff,
a huge storage
memories.
album for that. There are other methods, but yeah, I think probably a ton of people. I know I do. I love creating albums of our vacations to go back to on Facebook, and I use that as my storage system. Now, when you say delete those social media, I mean, we're still going to access the internet. So even if we're not going on a social media platform, when we're going into Google and we're doing searches, we're still providing the same data and still receiving the same types of prompts. They talk about on the documentary autofills and how that can be,
how that can change by region.
By
like where you
region
live.
and by what your interests that you've shown have been. So even that can influence, influence how you do things, how you go about surfing the internet. So when you think about deleting social media, do you think, well, would I cut myself off from the internet?
I
and
honestly-
the answer has to be no.
I think about it all the time. I think about just deleting Facebook altogether and just somehow trying to back up all my photos and my videos and stuff so that I have those memories and, but then the next thought, right? Your next thought is, oh, I would miss out on so much.
Well, we have
It's
family
like
that lives
the fear
away.
of missing out, right?
We have family that lives away, and that's one of to see the pictures. I mean, certainly you can pick up the phone and call somebody, but to see all those back to school pictures, right?
Instantly, on the moment you post it,
Somebody's
people
new,
can see it.
has a new baby born, and you get to see that. Somebody passes away, and there's an obituary, so then and you are able to, send out, because people aren't reading the newspaper
All
at the
that
same
information,
level before.
though, too, and just to play devil's advocate, like we could find out before Facebook, we could find out when somebody passed away. We could find out. I mean, it's all different.
We could when everybody
forms of
else was
media.
doing that way, but the world isn't sharing information in that way anymore.
No.
So we need to, unless everybody agrees to
Yeah.
go back to a certain way.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's difficult. You have tsunami warnings, for
Yeah.
instance. How instantaneous is that? If there's an active shooter in an area, that's spread through social media.
Yeah.
So there are so many benefits to it that I don't think we can ever, we know we can never go back. So if the rest of the world is sharing information that way and we choose to cut ourselves off from that, we're not going to access information in any other platform.
Yeah. The one of the most difficult things that I found about social media in so far as that documentary is how easy it is to find people in both positive and negative aspects of, let's just say, a political faction. If you are extreme right and you have you're against vaccinations, well, you can find groups where you can go on and find thousands of people who agree with everything that you agree with that, and make friends with them, and then make they basically said it's it could be a precursor to a civil war, because it's so easy to get
Polarized.
find people who agree with what you do. And if it's a negative, if it's right wing and nationalists and stuff, it's really, really dangerous. Do you know what I mean?
The whole discussion around, they touch on, the definition of truth, and you need to agree on what is truth. And the fact that if you are, for instance, somebody who believes strongly in conspiracy theories, if you're an anti-vaxxer, if you believe in the 5G, conspiracy theory around coronavirus, that all of a sudden you will be served up more articles, more groups, more information and videos that basically support your beliefs. So it reinforces it.
Or don't at all, and it's fake news. Fake news. Do you know what I mean?
Well, no, I guess when I that you perceive to support your beliefs is how I should say that.
Yeah.
And so then, even though what I found fascinating is that each person has a different experience on their social media platform. So when you log on to Facebook, your news feed and your ads, or if you're on YouTube, what's served to you is different than what's served to me.
Absolutely.
So your beliefs are reinforced. So everything that you've searched and everything is all of a sudden reinforced by all the content you're consuming.
Yes.
And everything that I've searched and has basically dictated what my beliefs will be.
Yeah.
And is then reinforced on my end. So all of a sudden you become more polarized. It just ingrains whatever sets of beliefs you have even further. So I found that, that piece of it, when we talk about being aware of data mining, and that a lot of I think all of us are aware that we're mined for data when we're seeing these ads that come up. Oh, I was just searching for my vacation, and all of a sudden I'm getting ads for that
all the
hotel. And so we're aware of those pieces, but it's the subtle things. Like when
I
they
know.
talk about when you're texting with somebody and when the person starts to type back and those little bubbles appear, the three dots.
That's all designed to
and they're
keep
sort
you-
of, and then all of a sudden you're watching and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, they're typing. I'm going to keep paying attention. And
Yeah.
then they stop. And then what goes through your mind? Oh, why did they stop? Were they
Yeah.
distracted? Are
Yeah.
they thinking about it? Did they erase what they wrote? Did I say something that upset them and they have to really think about what the reply is?
Which
Like,
is keeping you there.
all
right?
of these things happen
Paying attention.
because they decided to put up three dots that gave you feedback that that person was actually typing back to you.
Mm-hmm.
So those types of little subtle mind Jedi tricks that they do, and the fact that they use these
Manipulations,
human
really.
psychology to really,
Yeah.
draw you in.
And the dangerous part about all of it is it's not being monitored. The government is just letting these corporations kind of run their own course, but they truly are manipulating people.
And isn't that the
it's
scariest thing of all? Like I thought
It is.
the thing that we'd have to be worried about with, kids growing up is their access to porn on the internet.
Yeah.
When really that's probably the least of the
of our
worries.
worries, right. Yeah, I know.
When you think about the fact that you've got white supremacist groups recruiting or ISIS or conspiracy theorists, all of these things that are basically, there, waiting
Yeah.
for
someone
for young minds to come through and to take advantage.
And I feel that the whole social media experiment is just that. It's an experiment, and it's in its infancy. So it's only going to get worse as far as data mining, I feel. It's only going to get more substantial in its scope. It's going to be... It's going to be really interesting to see, and scary. It really is scary to me.
Well, the ability
But-
to influence, I think, to use the data, not even, it's not, what doesn't frighten me is that I might go and buy, another Subaru Forester because I search something on the internet and they
Yeah.
serve me up an ad. What frightens me is that they are influencing entire elections in countries that they are in, they use example of Myanmar and and
they're facilitating the Russians, like they're making it easy for the Russians to hijack democracy in a country that isn't even theirs. That's pretty scary.
well, and not just
That's
Russia.
like
I mean,
warfare.
they use a lot of different examples, right?
That's technological warfare at its finest, and I mean it's being fought maybe, but not really, not having much. Like they're doing it now, and they did it in 2016 as well. So
I love the idea they thought about, the idea of taxing data. So,
Yeah,
I mean, I
that
think
is-
what it came down to is the almighty dollar. So,
Yeah.
where is the incentive for all of these tech companies to really, come claw back a little bit on what they're doing? Not claw back, but like to basically be a little bit more. Use a moral compass and regulate what they're doing instead of focusing on what they can do to attract advertisers or basically make money. And so I know one suggestion was maybe if people were actually taxing these companies based on the amount of data that they mine. So the same way that you're taxed for your water. So if your water is metered, you're taxed by your water usage.
Mm-hmm.
So if you charged a company based on how much data they actually pulled from their consumers or from their users, then people, companies may be a little bit reluctant to take data that wasn't absolutely
that
necessary.
data is sold as well, right, to these companies.
Well, that's
And
why
you
it's
could-
money for
you
them.
could tax
Right.
that, right? Yeah, that makes sense.
So to tax,
I mean-
so there would be a control to say, listen, you don't need to take all of the data.
When it
And in
comes-
fact, if you take more than what you need, we're going to
Yeah.
tax accordingly. So there will be repercussions for
Yeah.
that.
When it comes to social media, for the sake of talking, what is the opportune age rather, for a child to be on it?
So one of the recommendations that the experts give near the end is around just basically they're saying
High
he had
school.
3 rules. He said no social media until high school. Have a cutoff time before bedtime, so it's time for them to decompress, and talk about time limits around screen time.
Well, I think it's obvious that there's a lot to unpack with this documentary, and I think people should watch it. The Social Dilemma. It's on Netflix. I'm not sure if it's a temporary thing. Like, I don't know how long it's going to be there, but check it out before it's gone.
Yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it. Obviously, we're passionate about it, so we'd love to hear what you think on social media.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. The irony is not lost on us, believe us. Okay, thanks for listening, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening.
And remember, you can catch up on past episodes at infoquench.com.
Or just about anywhere else you get your podcasts.
Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
And help spread the word about InfoQuench.
Till next time.